All right, guys, this is the final video for personality. This one is mostly centered around how we measure and kind of test our personalities, whether they are the scores on different scales or traits or whatever. A little bit of Freudian theory in here as well, and a couple of others. Pretty short overall, so let's jump right into it. So there are a couple different types of tests. The main two are like inventories and projective tests. Projective tests are these are kind of Freudian in nature. They or psychoanalytic in nature. They basically give you some ambiguous images, photographs, in some cases blots of ink, and your job is to interpret them as the best you can. Basically, the first thing that comes to your mind, the first thing you see, and the idea is that whatever the first thing that pops into your mind is, or whatever the first thing that shows up is, that's your subconscious coming to the surface. So if you look at something and you are constantly seeing violent, sexual, angry images or whatever, then Freud would probably argue that that's your normal subconscious. But then there can all that's coming up, but it should only come up every so often. So again, I've never obviously interpreted these types of tests, but these are just the ideas that the subject's subconscious comes to the surface as they interpret each of these types of tests, and these personality traits and things like that are going to come to the surface. So the first one of these tests was the Rorschach ink blot test. And if these look familiar, like if these ink blots to the right look familiar, that's because Rorschach, these tests have kind of grown into pop culture. Um, there have been various uses of these. I mean, there's a comic book character called Rorschach, if you're a Watchmen fan. Um, and, Rorschach came up with these in 1921, and then he promptly died in 1922. So he didn't get to see this grow. And you don't really hear of this being used a ton nowadays, but every so often they are using, and he came up with these. And you can see they're very basic. They used to you did these were used to be like kept kind of under lock and key so that no one knew what they looked like. But now you can Google or go to Wikipedia and find all of Rorschach's ink blots. And they're all symmetrical. They all you can turn them, but they're always symmetrical. And basically, you're supposed to examine them, observe them, and then say the first thing that comes to mind. And Rorschach kind of came up with a kind of key for like how and where patterns of answers might go towards and mean in regards to our personality. Another type of projective test is called the thematic apperception test, or the TAT. And these are very similar to Rorschach, but these actually use pictures. Some cases photographs, sometimes drawings, sometimes paintings. But it's obvious that they're paintings or photographs, but what's going on in them is not obvious. They're very ambiguous. Um, and basically, you are asked, if you take this test, you are asked to describe what you think would be happening in that picture. Um, what led up to it, what's happening in the moment in that image, and then what the characters are feeling and the outcome, basically to get a feel of like how you would interpret that scenario. And again, it's intended, just like the Rorschach test, to reveal parts of our unconscious coming to the surface while we answer the questions that are being asked by the administrator of the test. So here's some examples of images that could show up on the TAT, and you can look at all of them. They're all, oh, by the way, they're almost always in black and white, just like Rorschach's. And they're all, sorry, my face is covering up one of them, but they're all black and white. They're all pretty ambiguous. There's no dialogue or any, like, you don't know what's happening. This boy here is just staring at a violin, I mean, and they all are meant to be kind of ambiguous and kind of open to interpretation. And then your interpretation is meant to reveal parts of your subconscious. Projective tests have always kind of been a little controversial because they people who believe that they're good measurements of our personality basically say they're easy to administer, and you can usually understand, or at least you can usually get a pretty good idea of someone's personality through their answers. However, the critics or the people who are critical of these types of tests feel like they're very time consuming, they're very subjective, they're very vague, which I can see both sides. But these are, again, projective tests are, they're simple in their setup, but there's some parts of them that are a little inefficient, I think, at times. But that's just one type, is projective. And then the last type that we're going to talk about is the what we call self-report or inventories. And these are ones where you are given a test with a bunch of questions, and you essentially answer like true, that that does describe me, no, that doesn't describe me, not really sure, kind of in the middle, or maybe you answer like very true, somewhat true, neutral, somewhat false, very false, or whatever. Like there's all kinds of ways that you can, and you're answering about yourself. And that, just like we talked about with surveys way back in unit 2, or excuse me, unit 1, when we talked about how answering questions about yourself can be problematic, you can see how it might be problematic here. The most common and probably the most well-known personality inventory is called the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, or the MMPI, and this has shown up on the AP exam over the years in regards to a type of trait personality test or a personality inventory. But basically, it's 500 questions. You answer it with true, false, or cannot say, and then how you answer each question lines up with a scale on certain scenario or certain scales, and it scales on certain attributes, and then it shows you kind of. Myers-Briggs is also another self-report inventory, if you've ever heard of that. There's all kinds out there. So that was a super short one. I told you it was pretty short. Those are not the only personality tests out there, but those are the ones that line up with the theories we talked about with psychoanalytic, and then humanistic and social cognitive and trait theories as well. So that's it for this week. Next week, I'll send out a reminder about this a little bit later, but next week is going to be AP review, because your AP test is a week from next Tuesday on the 19th, so 2 weeks from this coming Tuesday. And we are going to spend a week doing some AP review. We don't really know exactly what that looks like yet, but we will let you know as soon as we can. So I hope you guys have a great week. Almost done with a month, which is crazy, of remote learning. But coming up next is some AP review the next week, and then the week after that is the AP exam. So we will talk to you then. I hope you guys have a great week.